Hi friends, it's Steph here from the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Books Beside My Bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. If I sound rubbish, it's because I am on the tail end of being sick again and I physically feel fine, I just sound absolutely rubbish and occasionally have to stop and cough a lot. So I will cut all of that out of this video. This is my reading wrap up for the Trans Rights Readathon as well as everything else that I read this week, and because I was sick I was gravitating towards much shorter texts and just things that could hold my attention for shorter spans when I wasn't able to focus a lot on actual reading, which I was actually okay to read. That wasn't making me feel unwell or anything like that, but I just couldn't do it for long periods of time. And so when that happens, I tend to gravitate towards shorter things. I do have a couple of kids review titles to share with you first. As I said, most of that content is shared on Kidlit Joy, but because these are review copies, I like to share them on both channels. So the first one is Dinosaur in My Pocket by Ashleigh, Barton and Blythe Fielden. This is a really gorgeous story of James who loves dinosaurs and he loves miniatures, and he has this shelf in his bedroom that's full of miniatures. And one day he's on a school trip to the museum and he sees the most perfect miniature triceratops and he wants to have it. The only problem is he doesn't have any money, and so he very quietly slips it into his pocket. As he is on his way home, this triceratops gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until finally his parents realize that there is a triceratops in their house and that it's threatening to crush the house, and they get out of James what's happened. And of course they're disappointed in him, but they ask him how he can fix it. And so they obviously return the dinosaur and then have a discussion about, well, how could James actually end up, buying that dinosaur? And he comes up with a way that he could help people out. He can do chores, he can earn his own pocket money, etc. And so it's really that journey of a child realizing you can't just take whatever you want. Stealing is not okay, and there are ways that you can, working with your parents, there are ways that you can find to be able to buy the things that are important to you. It's a gorgeous little story. I love the fact that it's a triceratops, which is my favorite dinosaur, so that appealed to me as well. But it's a gorgeous little book, and Ashleigh Barton's writing is great. So this one was sent to me by Hachette, so thank you very much to them. Then there is Tree by Claire Saxby and Jess Rackliffe. This is a narrative non-fiction story about a 300-year-old mountain ash. So I think it's based off a real tree or trees like it, and it explores the way that this tree exists and the way that it feeds the ecosystem around it, the flora and the fauna, and how important this tree is to that environment. It has a very beautiful lyrical narrative storytelling style and excellent word choice. One of my favorite things in kids' books is when authors use incredible verbs to actually tell the story, those wonderful tier 2 words. And I think the implication here is that this tree has seen the world for 300 years. And it is a call to action to protect our environments and to protect our forests and to protect these trees that have been around for a long, long time. And they are so important to the ecosystem. There's also this absolutely gorgeous fold out poster page. I'm not even going to be able to fit it in the whole screen, but it's the full length of the tree and its importance to the local environment. So it gives sort of a scale. But Claire Saxby and Jess Rackliffe are just an incredibly dynamic picture book duo who I adore their narrative nonfiction. So I read Iceberg, was it last year or the year before? It's still one of my favorite books, and Tree is definitely going to join that in one of my favorite narrative nonfiction titles. So thank you to Alan and Unwin for sending me Tree. And also from Alan and Unwin, I received a copy of When the World Was Soft, Yinjabandi Creation Stories. Now this is a collaboration between the Yuluwarlu group, an Aboriginal corporation, and the illustrator of this graphic novel is Alex Mankiewicz, I think. Apologies if I mispronounced that. And this is 5 Indigenous creation stories from the Pilbara region, which is not where I'm from. It's a different part of Australia. But it combines traditional Aboriginal paintings and artwork with photos and information about the region where these stories are from. It's a really cool concept for a graphic novel. And then it has different creation stories, so 5 different creation stories told in a graphic novel form. And the art style is really different and unique, but really fits the stories. And I'm not going to comment on the stories themselves because these are creation stories. So they're stories that have been told down verbally for generations and are now being recorded as a graphic novel so that more people can learn about them and can understand the story and the history of the region of Australia where these come from. Every Indigenous group in Australia, because there are many, many different groups in different parts of Australia, they all have their own creation stories. And so while there are similarities between groups, there are also differences. And I had not heard any of these particular stories before, so I was just immersed in understanding them. So I think this is a really, really important text. I think using the graphic novel format to tell them is really clever, and I just had a really wonderful time just exploring this. So both Tree and When the World Was Soft come out on April the 3rd, so if you're interested, I will leave links to them down below. Alright, then moving into the books that I read for the Trans Rights Readathon. So I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nghi, which was just a glorious story about two characters who meet. Rabbit, who was the handmaid of the Empress of Salt and Fortune, who has since passed, and Chi, who records history. And Rabbit is telling Chi stories of the Empress of Salt and Fortune's life in the hopes that they will understand a bit more about this ruler, who was married young to the ruler of a country that was different from her own and faced ostracization. She was exiled, and she fought back in the way that she knew how. So there's feminine rage in here, and it is just, like, it's really hard to describe. I'm not the right person to be describing it, especially not while I've got a little bit of brain fog, but it is just an incredible story. It is the first book in the Singing Hills cycle, and I will definitely be coming back to this over the next little while because I really enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed the characters and sort of the dynamic and the way that the stories were told, as if they're a story to learn but also a lesson to learn at the same time. And the ending was perfection. I also read Spellbound by F.T. Lukens, which is a young adult paranormal-ish kind of story. So you have Rook, who lives in a world where magic exists, and he used to live with his grandmother. His grandmother has passed, and that meant his connection to the magical world passed because he doesn't have magic of his own. He can't see it. But what he's determined to do is to try and find a way back into the magic world. And he has designed a way to see the ley lines where magic flows through this world. But in order to test his device, he needs to work with someone with magic. And so he ends up finding a way to be hired as the office assistant to this sorceress who has her own rival. And this rival of hers has his own apprentice, and the four of them get caught up in all sorts of magical chaos, especially when Rook's device becomes known, because the magical powers that be do not want non-magical people to know much about the magical world or to be able to have access to magic. And so things get very complicated very quickly. This was really fun. I love the characters. I loved Rook and Sun. So Sun is the other apprentice, and they are total opposites. Rook is a little bit chaotic and Sun is very ordered and knows exactly what they're doing with their life. Their whole dynamic was just really, really fun. And I picked this up totally on a whim. I think I found this book for like $12, which was cheaper than buying the ebook. So I thought I'd give it a go, and I was not disappointed. I also read A Matter of Disagreement by E.E. Ottoman, and this is the first book in the mechanical universe, I believe. It is a queer historical romance featuring rivals. So you have Ashcroft, who is more of a traditional scientist who's studied the world the way that it is for a long time. And then you have Leon, who has sort of taken up the newer sciences that are being explored. And they come into conflict over their difference of opinion about the importance of the new sciences versus the importance of the old sciences. And many of their meetings in the book end in arguments, and with one of them storming away because they're unhappy, but eventually they come to understand each other. And it was just short and sweet, and I enjoyed it. I also reread Exodus 23 by Freydis Moon. Again, this is a story that I've read before, but I wanted to annotate it, and I enjoy Freydis Moon's worlds, honestly. So you have Diego, who has made a few mistakes and is basically told or voluntold to go and help build or rebuild this church in the middle of nowhere. And there he meets Ariel, who is the person who is rebuilding the church. Diego gets the sense that Ariel is hiding something. It's not quite what he seems. And there are some very steamy scenes inside this church. Just be aware of that. And then we learn exactly what Ariel is. So there is the paranormal / monster element to it. It is super short, but it is really, really wonderful. I also listened to Better by Akwaeke Emezi, so I had the audio out from Libby. And this is a prequel to Pet, which I haven't read yet, and I will at some point. And I will admit, I think I am not clever enough for this story, but it is about Bitter, who is an artist who can bring to life her artwork through blood. And this causes some problems because in her world there is a lot of conflict that, you know, you draw parallels to the Black Lives Matter movement, etc., and the persecution of black people. When everything comes to a head, she summons an angel who is hell-bent on raising the world to the ground so that everything can start fresh. And it is about how Bitter comes to realize that once she has great power, because she doesn't see herself as being able to join protests and resistance in that way. but she resists through her art. And so she ends up involved unintentionally when her creations, to her mind, get out of control. But the reality is she probably never really had the control that she thought she did in the first place. It was a really interesting story. I probably should have read this one rather than listen to it, but I still enjoyed it and I will definitely continue with Pet. I also read In the Care of Magic by Robin Jo Margaret. Robin Jo Margaret, yes, that's it. And this is a erotic, cozy monster novella that ends with a platonic relationship. A lot of people were talking about this as a romance. It's not a romance. It is an erotic, cozy novella. It is about Gillian, who summons a sex demon, Lyle, and the two have some very steamy moments, and it ends with a platonic friendship where they sleep with each other when they want to. It was just nice and cozy and sweet. Hey, and I thought I was going to be able to get through this video without external interruptions aside from just, not being able to breathe properly. But no, that's not the case. I also read A Doctor's Touch by A.A. Fairview, which is a queer paranormal novella. This one is about a vampire who is a doctor who ends up having to save one of the local workmen who is a werewolf, and their relationship is just, oh my gosh, it's so sweet. Like, this one is super short, but I had a really great time with it. It was just very cozy, and I liked the vampire werewolf dynamics and sort of the mythology of that within this really short novella. And that ends all of my Trans Rights Readathon titles. So how many was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. That's better than I thought I did. I also listened to A Restless Truth by Freya Marske. This is a historical sapphic fantasy romance story. This story itself is set on a ship as they are traveling between places. Within this world, I don't really want to say specifics about this particular story because it links very heavily with the first book, and I am definitely going to be reading the third book in the next little while because I've got the audiobook out already for it. We are following Maud and Violet. They both come from very different lives. Maud is on the hunt to try and find the last of some magical relics, and she's traveling with an older woman who is murdered on the trip. And this old woman had one of those magical relics, and so she is desperately trying to get it back. And she comes across Violet, who is an actress, and a whole bunch of hijinks ensue. There's other people who are after these magical artifacts, who want to be able to take magic from other people. So everything sort of comes to a head on this ship as they recruit allies, and they have to find out who their enemies are. And along the way, Maud and Violet fall in love. And it was a really enjoyable time. I also reread Pucking Ever After Volume 1, which is by Emily Rath. This is a collection of short stories that are set in the Pucking Ever After universe, and they're set during and after Pucking Around. I reread this because the audio for it dropped, and I just decided I wanted to read it. It was something light, fun, and something that I knew would cheer me up while I was feeling pretty miserable. I also finally finished my collection of Poems That Make Grown Women Cry, edited by Anthony and Ben Holden. Spoiler alert, I did not cry while reading any of these poems. Possibly because they're not kind of necessarily the poetry that I tend to read, but these are women from around the world, influential women from around the world, who have selected their favourite poems that have had an impact on their lives. They've written a little brief overview about why they selected the poem, and then you have the poem in the text. As you would expect, a lot of them deal with death or grief or loss or war. I think the only way that I could say that this collection would have been improved is had they had to select poetry by women that made them cry, but there's a lot of old dead white guys in here, which is fine because I actually enjoy some of the old dead white guys' poetry as well. Not necessarily these versions of their work. So like, it was fun. Like, I definitely did a lot of tabbing. A lot of these are quotes and poems and things like that that I was intrigued by. I got the names of a couple of different Persian and Palestinian poets that I want to look up and explore more of their work. So I thought that was worthwhile. It also means that the books that would self-destruct TBR is done because I've either read or DNF'd everything on that list. So that's a tick for the end of March. I also read the Sitcom Star and The Reluctant Heartthrob by Jackie Lau. These were her 2 Kickstarter books for the Choose Restaurant universe. I love these covers, they're so cute. So the Sitcom Star is about Adrian and Maddie. Maddie is an actress. She is Canadian famous, not Hollywood famous, as the book states. And she has come up, she's a showrunner and a star on Choose Restaurant, which is sort of an Asian family drama that's set in their restaurant. It's a break between the seasons. She has a habit of burning herself out, running herself into the ground and burning herself out. And she literally stumbles into Adrian as he's coming out of a restaurant, and he spills some of his bubble tea on her. And the two of them went to primary and high school together, and so they reconnect. And he's always had a crush on her. And so it is about the two of them building back up a friendship and then a relationship, and it's very, very sweet. And then The Reluctant Heartthrob is the story of Ethan, who is Maggie's love interest on the TV show. So he's another actor, but he's grumpy and surly and he prefers performing theatre than filming. And he's doing it because it's a job and he's happy to do it, but he's very much unlike his character on the show, and everyone expects him to be bubbly and upbeat, and he's just grumpy and doesn't really want to spend time with people. And he ends up falling for Robin, who is a woman that he sees at his local coffee shop all the time, and the two have a one-night stand that then turns into something more. Robin is autistic, and so she has had some trouble with relationships in the past, and so she's reluctant, but she agrees with Ethan to give it a shot. And after they have their one night stand, she says, well, we're not going to sleep together now for a while because most people don't like my quirks and find that I'm weird, so I want to take sex out of the equation. So let's see if you get sick of me before we commit to something like that, because if we keep having sex, she's going to be all in and she doesn't want the heartbreak from that. Their relationship was just so precious. I really love this one. I think I enjoyed this one just a little bit more than the sitcom star, but yeah. They were both great. The one thing I will say about both of these though is that they are set in a post-COVID world, so COVID is mentioned because that had an impact on the filming schedule and everyone's lives. So if that's going to be triggering for you, be aware of that. But considering I have had COVID this last week and I was reading them and I was not triggered by it at all, I mean, it's not that bad. To be fair, COVID is not one of my triggers. And then the last book that I read this week, and I was finishing this off, was Growing Up Disabled in Australia, edited by Carly Findlay. This is a collection of stories by different people from Australia who all submitted their own histories and stories and lived experiences growing up disabled in Australia. They're all non-fiction and they represent a vast majority of the community. There's a lot of intersection in here. Some of the stories are upbeat, some of them are really difficult to listen to, the realities of what it's like to grow up disabled in Australia, and I think it is a really, really important read, just like every other book in this series, to help give you perspective, particularly if you don't live with any of these disabilities. So well worth checking out if you haven't already. All right, and that is my wrap up for this week. I have no idea how this is going to sound in editing, so thanks for sticking around during this entire video. If you've read any of these books, feel free to let me know in the comments. I would love to know what else you've been reading this week, if you have other things that you'd like to share. Otherwise, feel free to share your favourite emoji this week. Your pick. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, everyone.